All right, well, we'll do it, man.
Hey, I think we just need to commit, and then whatever happens, happens.
Three,
3,
two,
2,
one.
1.
Let's
Let's
go!
go! We
Yeah.
got it. We got it.
I'm your host of the PBE podcast, Troy Tittlemeyer, of course, joined by the co-host, the man, the myth, the legend. Skips is here. We have Sean McCoy with us from the Oil and Gas Global Network community. He is also a part of the ESG, the Environmental, Social, and Governance community. Man, this show is so much. I don't know how we're going to recage this thing right now, Skippo. But first, what's the latest with Skips, man? I know the Raiders are doing their thing.
Dude,
What
I
else you
mean,
got?
it's a good time in my life right now. The Cowboys aren't playing too well. I'm sorry about that, but the Raiders are playing. I don't know how we're winning games, but we're doing it. I'll take it. Dude, but life is good, dude. Just got back from Montana, visited the
Wow.
old stomping grounds, looked at did some hunting, did some fishing, and then yeah, just went back to, the places that, in my opinion, turned me into a geologist. It was just kind of a good getaway from all the, being quarantined, quote unquote, at home. So
Oh,
it was
man.
much, much needed.
Outdoor socializing, man. That
Oh,
future for everyone, man. Get out and go
dude,
camping.
but well, scratch my side. I think you had a little bit of a bigger life moment, a couple days ago. I mean, family grew by one, man. Congratulations.
Yeah, man. Joe J's Tittlemeyer, man. He's a
Dude,
hyphen. He's a
dude, dude, JJ.
hyphen. Dude, wow. That the building of energy, the release of that energy, the experience of becoming a father for the second time, essentially, right? And that is a real reminder of how much fun and how amazing this life is, and our opportunity to take these breaths and speak to each other, man. It just elevates it to a whole nother level, and I've expanded that into my business and everything else. And that's how I get rid of it. That's how I release all that energy that my heart and mind takes on, man. And he's been such a cool kid, dude. He's got his hands. He's the man. He's the man. And I call her Big Mama. My wife did, and Jocelyn, she's just absolutely coming back from it better than the first child. She's motivated. She's excited to get out, get sun, get hiking. Gosh, man, I'm so proud to have her as a wife. She's an incredible woman, incredible love, man. So when I'm here with you guys, I get the comfort to know that she's there and taking care of the fam, man. So it allows us to create shows like this, Skips.
Oh yeah. I mean, this show in particular was great. It's kind of off of what we typically talk about, but it's something that needs to be talked about, right? Because this is something that, even for technical folks, right? We get so deep into the weeds and what we do, we kind of forget about, the big picture stuff, the true big picture stuff. And Sean, I think, shout out to Sean, does a great job of breaking it down and explaining the complexities of ESG, which was just a learning experience from start to finish for me.
Agreed. Sean, welcome to the show, man.
I'm happy to be here, man. I just so appreciate the invite. Love what you guys are doing. Love the show because it allows me to take out and be a little bit of a nerd on that side and learn, because I don't know the word superdification. What's the word?
Serpentinization.
Serpentinization. Yeah. I'm like, oh man, I got to figure that out. So I love that kind of stuff. Thank you for doing that.
Man, that's awesome, dude. Well, this show, without question, is a big one, man. When you're talking about environmental, social, and governance, we're combining what we do in the oil and gas industry. You are creating shows that have case studies of real life situations that all of a sudden a new governing body came out, and now that business has felt pressure that it had a complete curveball. Didn't exist in anyone's conscious before that time. Governance came in, major curveball for the business. I look forward to those shows with you and what you're doing there. I truly do believe when I said that you should be there, you should get a seat at the table and talk to people about what's going on in our industry and how we're getting through this, man. I think you would be perfect for that. It was an honor to share this time with you.
You too, my friend. You too. Both of you guys. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we touched on a lot of cool stuff on this show, but I mean, for me, I think the thing that my biggest takeaway for sure was the scope of the different problems, right? So you can go from, like you were talking about, Sean, from on the environmental side, from a bush in your front yard to, total emissions in the US, right? What is the scope of this impact and how that impact affects us socially, right? And then, the tie-ins that you had up in Michigan as far as, hey, we have all this infrastructure from oil and gas that's not being used. Hey, let's use it to power people's homes, stuff like that. And I mean, you can get so deep in the weeds. You can get, and that's where I think my mind is spinning right now, is how everything is so interconnected and so complex.
Yeah.
So
it's a big topic for sure.
We attacked it, man. I feel pretty dang good about the show and how we discussed these things and got forward and moved forward and bringing geology back into the major focus from my perspective and sharing that passion and sharing that idea. So I appreciate you giving us the opportunity, man, to have this discussion and to hear your thoughts and combine. And now we're a mass of three moving forward, sir.
Yes, sir. Yeah. And it's a large target to try to figure out. I mean, even how to attack, how to understand. But I think we're up for it. And it's one of those things. It's like when you're if you think about the complexity of what you guys do, I mean, how do you evaluate that amount of, geological surface area and below the earth? And how do you get such an accurate picture of it that you can create a business model and succeed at it and do well? It's a tall order. We take a lot of that for granted, just as a basic premise. A little bit of what Skips was saying. It can be really easy to forget just how difficult this is, but that we're up for it. I mean, I definitely want it to be a hopeful conversation for everybody.
That's awesome, man. And the nonprofit side on my side, Kim Research Institute and Skips is, I mean, we're moving that forward. How could this scale and this model be built? It was 50 years of these very amazing stories, and it's all there for us to consume now and make sense of. This is not just an idea. It's the fact that we're moving forward with real substance, real value that people can dive into tomorrow and really start making a difference. So we take it very seriously, our responsibility at PBE. We love having humor, and we love the fact that we can make these great shows, and it's conversations that really lead to value at the end of the day. So I think that's it, Skips. What do you think? Is this show ready to begin?
I think we're ready to start this bad boy. Let's get this thing rolling.
Sean McCoy, this is the conception part of the show, and I am looking forward to getting to know you and getting to know more about everything you got going on. The Canon, I see that, and I don't know much about it with the oil and gas network community, our global network community, and so the conception part is our opportunity to get to know you, your perspective, your career and experiences that really allow you to speak to the subject that we'll get to today and we'll drill down into ESG, environmental, social, and governance around oil and gas. And so this is, for me, exciting. I'm looking forward to what your story is.
So I was trying to remember, this isn't the part where we yell, "Let's go," is it? Or do we?
No.
I'm ahead. I've been amped. I want to make sure that I do it right. Make sure I get in there and
save that energy. Save it.
Oh, it's there. No worries. So, obviously it's honored to be here, honored to be a chance to represent the chance to talk about this subject with you guys. And I really appreciate your show. I appreciate what you're doing. I love listening to it. And it really is coming from a perspective of historically, I'm in my 18th year of the oil and gas industry. I started in 2000 with Schlumberger on the upstream side I wasn't in the field, but I was in manufacturing, supporting the field in various roles. I heard you guys talk about, density neutron. So the majority of my time at Schlumberger, I was actually the nuclear products champion that built the density source and Americium's ambi source as well. So I made that and all the auxiliary equipment. So when you guys are talking about that stuff, in my head, I'm going, I know just enough about from the supply side. Like I took care of all the physics guys and all the geo guys and all the rest of that stuff to help them, as far as the triple combo and stuff like that. So I have an affinity and a love for the field locations and that particular data set. So, and you don't get to talk about that stuff pretty often. And I actually worked for a company supporting the oil and gas industry, or supporting customers like Schlumberger, Halliburton. I used to sell the assets too for a company out of Boston. And so I know a lot of nuances and interesting stuff about source material and things of that nature. So it's a great chance to kind of nerd out.
Let's take a chance to nerd out for a second.
Yeah.
Let's talk about neutron density.
Yes,
This is two separate sources
correct.
receiving two separate data points from essentially the same footage. Or
So yes, well, so what kind of, well, as you know, the density measurement was always done by with the cesium source using gamma rays. Basic, when I used to tell people basic chemistry around, as you guys know better than I do, oil is this dense, water is this dense, and whatnot, to give you not just a geological layer from a standpoint of what the rock looks like, but where are the hydrocarbons relative to it. And I used to try to tell people from a conventional standpoint, back when conventionals ruled the plays, right? That's what you want to know, where that sweet spot was. So you had to get a really good 4D image of where that is. And then I used to always tell people the sponge analysis around porosity. I was like, well, you have rock and it doesn't look porous, but it does change. And that's one of those metrics that it becomes efficient. It becomes, this is kind of the math takes over, how viable is the well, how viable is the formation, and using those neutrons to get that, basically that porous version of it in terms of how hydrocarbons flow. And so that was a majority of what I did.
And so a cesium source is sending out what exactly to measure the density of the rock and fluid?
Yeah, gamma rays. So you basically use this collimator made out of like tungsten, or pretty much tungsten's a big one, or something dense like that. You basically make a collimation around the gamma rays. It gives you like a focal aspect. And as it's rotating, or as you're doing a wireline operation, you're basically just permeating the formation. And as you read that back in other places of the tool, you use those things and extrapolate out data sets that then give you an opportunity to create that 4D picture relative to the formation.
Skips, got anything before I dive into another question about that?
No. Keep going. Keep firing off. I like where your head's at.
If you're talking cesium and now tungsten, so the relationship between those metals and really the tungsten. So how much science has gone into messing with that particular metal that the signal's going out of and coming back in? Because you got so many other options, I would assume.
Sure. Well, so it's kind of simplistic. It's not really all that complicated. It's because it's the densest metal. Like you use lead or use tungsten, because you want to actually focus that gamma ray emission, because the gamma ray doesn't know or care what you're asking it to do, right?
That's
so you
cool.
have to kind of trick it into like giving you this precision. That's where the precise measurement comes from. That's where the high-level analysis comes from in terms of collimation and stuff like that. I was in China years ago, and they were having a really difficult time. They were using some knockoff sources, kind of backdoored into the country from other places. And they were constantly doing these wireline logs, and they kept drilling. They kept getting these logs saying there was oil, and they kept producing water. They couldn't figure it out. And so I went in there, gave them this presentation, and basically showed them that the collimation. So if you imagine a flashlight versus a laser, and not just for sight, but for measurement in terms of how you perceive it back to you. So you want a laser, you want this high focus beam of energy to get a better evaluation of the formation. Then you do this kind of sporadic gamma rays are bouncing all over the place and being received back the other way.
Wow.
So
Interesting.
Bang, the laser beam goes out. Boom, it's bringing back laser beams of data, and that is awesome. That's why we can do things like we're doing on Mars and other countries, or meteorites. We can land on that stuff, shoot with laser beams, and the robot's going, "Hey, this is what it's potentially all about." Now, take me into the neutron. All right, we're sending.
Well, I got one question just to back up to the gamma. So the tool itself, how is it designed differently when you're looking at just your standard gamma versus like a spectral gamma?
So if I remember correctly, because I remember the spectral gamma is much more of kind of, I think a lot of it is penetration, if I remember correctly. Now, keep in mind, I have to confess, I was a manufacturing engineer, not the mechanical engineer. So if there's anybody out there if I'm off a little bit, and this is 2020, so it's been a little over 10 years since I've messed with that kind of stuff. So I'm digging back.
We're doing fine, man. Yeah.
Okay, well, some of it starts to come back as you start rolling through this. I'm going to go back and remember what ESG stands for. But so the gamma, I think it's a more focused, powerful measurement. If I remember, the natural gammas was much more of kind of a geological impression, if I remember correctly. We're just trying to understand the natural aspects of the rock to give you more of a composition measurement, rather than just like a precision, kind of like relative to the hydrocarbons. You're more of a geological layer and kind of where that is, if I remember correctly. So it's a different ask of the source, even though you hear those two and sometimes you get confused, because there'd be gamma companies and a company I work for would be like, well, how come we don't sell to them? I'm like, well, they use their gamma sources are like minutia in terms of Curie rate and strength. We were using a 1.7, 1.6 Curie source for the gamma rays from the gamma or for the gamma measurement side. So I think it's more of a measurement of the natural gammas of the formation versus introducing gamma rays to get a perception of the formation.
Gotcha. Yeah. That's awesome. Thank you for breaking that down.
Yeah, man.
You know what's really cool is you guys might like this. So the actual cesium material, they actually put it in a ceramic. They would actually heat it and they would embed it into this ceramic glass pill. It would then have this MP35N, just second and third level casings with literally 0 to no tolerance. I used to be able to take some of these secondary and tertiary encapsulations, and it was the tolerances were so tight that the air would hold the capsule up as it would slide down like an elevator, because you want that precise center of activity, or that you want that center of activity to be exactly where you expect it to be from an engineering standpoint, because that impacts the quality of your measurement. So Schlumberger was obviously extremely good at this. But if you're not, you can then you have poor equipment, you have poor measurements, you have poor data.
Yeah, then you're finding water.
Wow. Yeah. Very interesting, man. And then this next one kind of ties into ESG a little bit, in my opinion, because we're talking radioactivity and neutron device gets a little more interesting. But the other thing I thought of, and we can come back to, or we can just leave it alone, is the idea that Schlumberger was able to have an R&D department with obviously millions and millions of dollars that went ahead. They made decisions 20 years ago and went ahead, and they came up with this cesium capsule and this tungsten body that, this design to get the best results, the most reliable results. That's constrained by some ESG rules, I'm sure, at Schlumberger. There's some safety involved in all that. But the other thing I'm interested in is, what is the agility of Schlumberger, in your opinion, when the geology catches up to the drill bit, for example, and now we are thinking about these reservoirs in a completely different way, and Schlumberger is going to have to respond?
Well, they did. Yeah, so they did. So what you're getting at, and so the ambi source, real quick, basically they use, you combine beryllium, the metal, with americium-241. So americium-241 is an alpha emitter. And so what you do is you basically mix like you do chocolate chip cookie dough, and you try to get as much of the beryllium around the actual americium molecule, if you want to call it, or just the component, or because when it reacts with that, then it produces neutrons. Other than that, it's just an alpha emitter and it's useless. Wow. So, and that's the same alpha emitter that you use in your smoke detectors, by the way. And then what they do is there's a little pad, and basically the alpha emitter goes across, and when moisture basically gets in there and stops it or moves it around, that's how they know there's smoke. That's how a smoke detector works. The battery is just for the sound. It's not for the actual detection.
That is awesome.
So the same thing used in your neutron sources is actually in everybody's home and everybody's smoke detector. And so
it's freaking crazy. I had no idea about that.
Yeah. So stuff like that. And so what you do is then you mix those two things. Well, so the problem with that, and one of the things that Schlumberger did that was really, really amazing, wasn't just the actual mechanics around it, but the ability to fish it. So if you're drilling with a tool that has two nuclear sources in it, so back in the day of the conventionals, the wireline, well, what happens if it gets stuck? This is like ESG before it was ESG before.
You got to condemn that hole, right? So
you can't go back in there. So that's a big problem. So they designed this thing that looked like a javelin. This is what I used to build. It was basically it had a titanium rod and would bend and all this other stuff in the pockets, but you could actually fish it. So if the tool got stuck, you could actually go down and fish just the sources and pull them out of the tool.
Totally change the diameter of the thing, make it easy to get back up the hole.
Yeah. Yep. It literally looked like a javelin. Yeah. Smart. It had a little shear pin. It was inside the flow. It was inside the internal mud flow. You just basically just grip it and yank it out. And that way you could abandon the tool, but you could salvage the source.
Salvage the hole, at least.
Let's go. That's incredible.
Smart stuff. Yeah. Right. All that to say, so now fast forward to 2009 or 2010, as the shales come on board. So here's the funny thing. So if in a conventional well, you need density and you need porosity. Those are like two of the big ones, right? Two massively important from a viability standpoint. I remember I listened to these scientists and companies like Chevron would say stuff like, these are the most important measurements. Like everything's dictated off of this, right? I mean, it's in terms of critical. Now there's lots of them, so don't misunderstand me. But just so the accuracy around those measurements is extremely important from a conventional standpoint. introduce horizontals. Well, what do you know about a horizontal? A shale play, you know where the oil is. It's in that layer, right? The hydrocarbons are stuck in the shale.
Uh-huh.
So your density measurement's kind of useless. You're in it. That's the big thing. So in a sense, right? So in a sense, you don't have to know where the oil is vertically speaking from a conventional standpoint. The unconventionals, you're in it. You're in the layer as soon as you hit it and you go into it. You run a
Yeah,
horizontal.
in
Right.
and around it for sure. They're like,
Right. You have variations, but you're in it. You're not searching for it like in a conventional. And what was the big thing that started? What's everybody's favorite word? Everybody, no matter who you are, you know this word, and that's fracking now, right? Because you're going to introduce fracking into the shale. Well, what does that do? That introduces porosity in a
oh
sense.
Yeah, permeability. Yeah.
and the
So
density change. Yeah.
right. So if you're me is sitting in your office in 2011, 2010, Schlumberger commercializes this tool called the Neoscope. And the Neoscope tool uses a PNG, by the way, instead of sources. So then they do want to check the neutrons and they do want to check the gammas. They can turn the neutron generator on and off. The big problem with the regular conventional source is it's good and it's bad at the same time. Engineering wise, the source is always on, so you never have to worry about it not working. But when you pull it out of the hole, it's still on, and there's people, back to ESG, people have to mess with that, and that's never a good day.
Yeah.
Right. Even the most prominent, right? It's you start getting stuff in your head. There's all, we have visions of 3-headed monsters and 3 Mile Island, and everything's crazy, and everybody panics. Oh my God, it has a trefoil on it, so I have to lose my mind. And I used to tell people, I said, don't worry. I said, the only things that emit radiation are things made of atoms. And then they would kind of look at me and go, yeah, like everything. So it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. I promise. And I'd have dummy sources on my desk and people would ask me, oh, is that real? And if I wanted them to go away, I would say, yeah, that's a real source. It's just sitting on my desk radiating.
That is awesome. How long were you with Schlumberger?
So a little over 9 years, 2000 to 2009. And I spent the majority of that time as the nuclear products champion in LWD, doing not only making these sources, but then I did all the auxiliary equipment. And one of my favorite things I did when I was there was I designed a leak test and inventory assistant, which became standard in all DNM locations throughout Schlumberger. And it was basically, I designed it myself, even though I'm not an engineer, but it was basically to help field location operational personnel interact with the sources, because there's this fear. It's one of these fears. If you don't know something, ignorance takes over and fear takes over. But once you understand what it is and you're comfortable with it, and you give people a medium to integrate and do the stuff they're supposed to properly, it can go a long ways. That was one of my happy places. And so I was there for a little over 9 years. And at the same time, while I was there, I started out in electronics, started out doing repair work, working with suppliers and field locations, and really got a love for the men and women out there that are on more or less the front lines of the oil field services side when I was there, that are working all day long, all night long. And I'm the guy working Monday through Friday in the product center. But I made sure I took care of my people for sure. Yeah.
And where'd you go from that? So I'm taking notes to get
It's okay.
back on track.
So so as a side note to that, while I was at Schlumberger, you talked about safety, you talked about environment, you talked about just culture, stuff of that nature, which I think is very important in this discussion. Safety, if you talk to anybody in the industry, I mean, I reverse park to this day. I've never stopped doing that. And I also got very, very involved in the corporate social responsibility side. I got very involved and also on a personal level, just kind of this consistent question around what's the role of business outside of the kind of the either supplying a product or service, and obviously being profitable when you do that. What else, right, do we expect from an employer? What else do we expect from a company from a social standpoint? What else can we do, and what are we supposed to do, and what does that look like? And in 2005, while I was at Schlumberger, I helped create a softball tournament that's still going on to this day that raises between $300,000 to $400,000 a year for kids with pediatric cancer. And I got to work with other companies. And so we use it as a company standpoint, a B2B interrelational aspect in terms of not only suppliers, but also peers in the industry. We worked together with NOV for, a little over 12 years. We reached out to them. We combined these efforts. And so you got to see a philanthropic model, and then also, in some elements around that in terms of my own personal experience in the corporate world around even how you handle that. You can do these events, but what are you doing on a day-to-day standpoint from a sustainability aspect? And what's your responsibilities and roles and restrictions around when I used to deal with nuclear sources, right, all the time, there's an inherent responsibility that you have. Sure, there's federal, state, local mandates, but then the company itself has a mandate, right, and where your standard
Right.
wants to be and what is acceptable to you, which is part of the equation, and
Yeah.
definitely ties into the ESG side as well.
Right, man. I think the reality and what I'm hearing and thinking back and what I'm doing now, the whole thing, it's hard to open up your scope when you have the problem that needs to be solved, and that's your responsibility to communicate with resources around you that are going to help you solve that problem and that are actually excited that you're calling them to help solve that problem. But now you're talking about reaching out to other companies, right? You got to open up this scale right now for us to actually recover from this. It's going to take the industry. It's business, science, and the people. It's all in as we're reorganizing and getting through this.
Yeah.
So the individual's got to open up that scale. Skippo, you got experience in this, man. This is what I'm up. It's a 5-minute conversation. Call. Hey, this is what I'm up against. And Skips comes with that slightly different perspective to your problem. And bang, you're now opening up that.
Yeah. And so I think what's important, and this is part of where I was really excited about coming in to talk to you about, because I know listening to your show, I know by following you, it's a theme I've heard from you, and it's something that I would invite you both on some level to entertain. I mean, we're getting to know each other. I listen to what y'all say, and I'm like, those are my people. Those are the kind of people I would be, if we lived next to each other, we would hang out in the evenings. We would talk, and so I understand, and I definitely understand and appreciate logic, science, engineering. Here's a problem, here's a solution. Let's get it. Let's go. Let's get it done. Right. 100%. I mean, I grew up that way. I was that way for a long time, and there's a certain amount of. What's nice about it is that there's a certain amount of undeniability around, and where I think a lot of us struggle. We start talking about things like science, or you look over and go, how can somebody believe that the earth is flat? How can somebody believe this, right? And even where I think this real struggle starts to really become intense, and I think this is where we're starting to, and we're seeing it now relative to this subject, right. Is it's like, well, wait a minute, here's the facts. When the Prime Minister of England gets on the television and says, here's our carbon net neutral goals by 2050, and a quick cursory understanding of logistics shows him that, hey, you'd have to build like a windmill farm a day, every day for the next 30 years to hit that, just based on your model here, without anything else ever changing over the next 3 decades. Oh, and by the way, you're already behind, right? And so right, and so we tend to, but so there's this war, right, in a sense that we feel like we have between science, logic, reasoning, practicality. And then there's this, here comes unicorns and rainbows and hearts and feelings, right? Into the mix.
It's where, people making emotionally based decisions opposed to, like you said, decisions based on logic.
Sure. And so I think the invitation I would give, and I think it ties back into the subject, if you will, and it's kind of a help from a listener standpoint. I would encourage people that it seems rational, no pun intended, or logical, to just 86 the emotional side, and if I just get the facts, I'm good.
Right.
Then I can make a decision. I would entertain the idea, especially in the realm of ESG, and as we look at it and how businesses are going to have to account for it, you're not going to be able to do that quantifiably, because you're going to bring in you're doing it anyway, whether you like to admit it or not, I would argue, but especially around these topics, you're going to bring in an emotional side. That emotional side is going to be extremely strong and prevalent. So it shouldn't be all of one, and it shouldn't be all of the other, because as humans, we can't do that. We like to think that we can.
Right.
It's just that you can see cognitive dissonance in a scientist just as much as you can see it in a 16-year-old girl talking about, climate change, and all she's ever done is take one social studies class, and barely understands how to, even what a geological layer looks like, let alone all the stuff that you guys know.
Yeah. So I was gonna say, you go to a conference, and that's, you'll watch some guy do a presentation. You'll say, hey, there's like these errors here and there, but he'll go to his grave saying those are the correct answers, not because, like you said, logic and reasoning has been taken out of it. Now this is like his baby. This can't ever be wrong, kind of a thing. Right. So,
and it's his logic, or reasoning that's coupled with the problem is the emotion is still there, even on something that you believe, and even stuff that I believe.
Yep.
There's an emotional connection. And as we deny that, because it's easy to do that in business, right? Oh, it's
yeah.
not personal, it's business. Oh, just work hard. Oh, just do the right thing, or just just this. We give it this kind of singular focus in terms of results, because it's hard to argue with bottom lines a lot of the time, right?
Yeah.
Possible to argue with logic, essentially. When you have it, it's impossible. But you got to respect the emotions. You got to respect the experience and the perspective of the conversation.
Yeah.
So you describe this as a war, a psychological
Yes.
war. So in war, there are strategies. In war, there are small battles. In war, you can conquer something. So if we're all listening, as you suggest, and we all have this idea that we can come together and actually fight this war against this, metaphysical thing called emotion and logic that everyone has and everyone has to accept and everyone has to get through. What's your first strategy in this war?
I'd ask you to redefine what you look at as war and what the context of war implies.
I like it.
Okay, because when you hear the word war, what do you expect, right? We expect a winner, and we expect a loser. Correct? Like we expect one or the other to prevail. And what we've learned, if this is where I get my little history dork on, ideas don't go away. The people that support them may come and go, right? But the ideas that those people have, and the idea of something, whether it's communism or socialism or nationalism or fascism, or pick your ism or your style, these are ideas that come from the creative process of just being people and life learned and cultures and experiences.
Right.
You're not going to defeat an idea. So we can redefine the war as not something where we're trying to conquer, but take it. It's a war, but it's not. It's an opportunity, right? To bring in that tension of those differences, to bring in those different aspects, and say, how can I, without getting my way totally, right? And what am I going to be okay with? Somebody who just looks at me and just doesn't agree with me. Years ago, on a business trip in Schlumberger, I was up with a company up in Canada, and I was young, much younger than I am now, obviously, but talking to this guy, I'm from Texas. I just wasn't as worldly as I would like to have thought I was at the time. And we were arguing about the death penalty. I'm from Texas. It's like, it's what we do. It's what we've been known as for, right? And some reason we take this perverse, glean that we have for many years. This is kind of what we are. And as we go, and I was looking at it from a standpoint of, I just knew it prevented crime. I just knew it was retribution. It was the thing. And he finally just looked at me and said, I just don't agree. I just don't agree that we should ever do that. And it took me a moment to kind of step back and go, okay, well, in my head, I was just so committed to this idea, and he just wasn't. And why wasn't it okay for him just not to agree with me on this subject? Why is this the hill to die on for this thing? And then can I acquiesce and just say that he just doesn't believe that anymore? He's just not where he's at. And can we do that? Can we look at, because you're starting, not to get too nuanced about it, but look at the ESG factors. Look at those three words that you just talked about: environmental, social, and governance. I mean, social alone, to try to quantify and have some sort of barometer on what is acceptable in any capacity, on an individual, cultural, communal, socioeconomic, governmental.
Yep.
We've all agreed what the social parameters are. We've agreed on how we're going to measure those things. We've agreed on what our targets are to achieve a certain level of proficiency or something like that. If we bring our engineering and scientific mind into that scenario, how do you do that? How do you bring in this world of quantifiable metrics and data and logic into the world of just mental health?
Yeah.
From an employee standpoint. And I'm talking like just normal mental health, not the people that are, suffering.
Yeah. You got to start compartmentalizing this whole thing. And today, and the reason why this podcast even exists, and why it's not just about entertainment and having great conversations with people that I truly think that I'd be friends with for the rest of my life. But the other thing, and the other obvious thing that needs to be said, is that today in 2020, we as a population, the social aspect of environmental, social, and governance is saying, all right, we don't really know what's going on. Let's start there. We have this metaphysical, psychological fight that's happening where what's the source? What's the process? everyone's looking at this now, and now we got to communicate the fact that it's okay that there was a lot of misunderstood facts about our model of what is truth or what is real, right? A model is just an approximation of reality. Reality is when you put data in that model, it makes the prediction, and that thing was real before it was real, right? That's why this works. So if you go back to the basics, and you start breaking down this problem from the fundamentals, I believe that is motivation and also opportunity in our country specifically, because we are readdressing from the basics, which is motivating and providing opportunity for everyone, for that social category to combine and get together and say, this is now the new argument to this problem. That's going to unite. That's going to allow us to break down, drag out, fight, and figure out how do we get forward with this new information, with this new model, post-COVID-19 model, if you want to call it that. How do we get through it? Let's do it, man. That's the social aspect of it all. We could do that.
We can if and this hinges on a lot of things. This is the other thing, is that there's never a dualistic answer. It's never one or the other. It's a combination of things. So if we're okay with what that model shows us, not just the model going forward, but there is an essence of, we have to look backwards and understand how we got here and what has been the model previously. And so it's this something, and even on a personal level, after Schlumberger staying in the oil and gas industry for about 8 or 9 years in different areas of supporting the industry through as a supplier, machine shops and other people like that, and then started my own business, and I got back into it and that didn't work, and then I got back into the oil and gas industry a couple of years ago. But on a personal level, I've had to understand that system historically that we're talking about, that worked for me and worked for you and worked for everybody else in whatever way that it wasn't the same throughout. It wasn't the same for all. And are we willing, and I say the collective we, but I'll start with myself. Am I willing to look at and say, I've had advantages in my life, preferences for lack of a better word, because the other P word gets everybody really upset. I mean, privilege. So preferences because of my gender, preferences because of my race, preferences because of the language that I speak. I've been between the military and the oil and gas industry. I've been to 33 countries in my life.
Wow.
I've yet to be to a country that didn't speak English.
Wow.
That's a privilege. I gave presentations from audits I did in Ecuador to people inside Schlumberger, and they all spoke Spanish, and I was the only person and I only spoke English, and yet I could do it. I did presentations in China to my customers in their country, and I spoke English. I gave presentations at conferences in Europe, Austria, different places like that, and I got to speak it in my language. That's a privilege that I have. It's just, I didn't ask for it. I didn't earn it. I didn't do anything special to make it happen, but that's what it is. And so part of this journey too, and the reason why it's becoming, I think it's so interesting, Troy, too, and Skip, so you think about it from a standpoint of, I use this analogy the other day on a presentation I did for some students in India. You take a rod of iron, and a blacksmith is churning it. When you're folding it, you're doing different stuff to it. What happens as it gets hot and you're banging through it? The impurities come out. That fire, that cauldron, pushes the stuff that you don't want to the surface. I think we've seen this with COVID. It has pushed it all. It's been there. The impurities, the negative stuff, the old stuff we don't want to talk about, the old systems we don't want to talk about, the stuff that we're not very proud of. It doesn't look good on a postcard, doesn't look good in the history books.
That's right.
We just kind of let it sit.
But we just have always not always, but we just kind of disregarded it for the most part. It was always put on the bookshelf and just, hey, don't worry about that. That's there, but yeah, don't worry about it.
Right.
Woo!
We're sorry, or not even that. We're just kind of, we've moved on. We're better now, and that kind of thing. And so I really think what COVID did, and I think something like, obviously, George Floyd was not the first person, to be named in that type of incident with law enforcement and stuff like that. But did it made all this stuff come to the surface in a time where, back to logic and everything else, my finance buddies would always be like, at the end of the day, what's important? Milton Friedman, profit, profit, profit. Here we are in a pandemic, 9% reduction of the entire U.S. economy, massive unemployment, still economics are in the tank for massive parts of it. Now we're going to see what's important, and it's going to be making money, and we don't care about the environment. Can wait, social aspects can wait, governance and how can wait. And yet, what did we see? We didn't see that. We've seen it as you're talking about, Troy, you can't go on LinkedIn. You can't scroll 2 feet or 2 inches or what do you want to call it. ESG, 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 sustainability, ESG, 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 right? Renewables. Oil and gas is going away. Oil and gas is going away. You know, President-elect Biden said it in his debate, oil is dirty, right? There's this, and I mean, how
It's
ridiculous
about business, man. Business is pushing forward.
Right. It is. I think there's going to have to be, for lack of a better word, and I use this word in this context, a little bit of a reckoning back to what you're talking about, Skips, where there's a reconciliation relative to the system as you're talking about. We're going to go forward. That's part of it. But part of the issue is we've not acquiesced. We've not recognized what's got us here, the foundation.
Yeah, especially the bad stuff, right?
Yeah.
Especially the fact that our models were completely incorrect and no one could see that, especially because the other problems that we have that no one wants to address. But we are. The metal is being twisted, the hammers are hitting, the sparks are flying, and we're getting through it just fine.
and it kind of ties back, I guess, not to bring it full circle, because definitely not, but like you were saying with war, like as Sun Tzu like wrote in his book, right? It's not, you know, the strategies of war, it's the art of war. War is an art, right? It's understanding what your moral values, and then you're also understanding, you know, we have these methods and these disciplines that we need to follow, but as the enemy changes, whatever that is, if you're saying it's a psychological, a scientific, a logical, you know, economic model, as that changes, we need to change as well, right? We can't expect the enemy not to come. It's our responsibility to be ready for that change.
Right.
Yeah. So
and I think,
let me throw a little historical hope to you and give you an example of why I'm with you, Troy. Like it is about progressing. It is about the new tomorrow. The part that gets me, lack of a better word, excited, in understanding that the war is that process is going to be, that's not the sparks. That's hard. It's difficult. So World War II, who were the two primary, what were the two primary countries we fought in World War II?
Let me ask you to do this instead of using actual war, because what we're talking about is a war of something metaphysical. We're talking about the war of logic and emotion being able to come together in a human's mind to make the best decision for the best future.
Yes.
That's not war like we're, you know, the word like World War II. So do you have an example of something like that, or do you want to just go with what's your...
So let me just Joe on that one real quick, and then I'll come back to this idea of how we can bring in because that's a heart and mind issue. I'll tell you, the listener, the challenge is going to be starting with ourselves first, and this is internally in terms of going within, not going into this political party or going after this state or after this part of the industry, which is why the rhetoric is not going to work. This idea of and it gets us real defensive. You start saying we're going to get rid of oil and gas, we're going to get rid of this industry. You're now this enemy. Back to the war metaphor. And what happens is what happens with you, what happens with me, if you're marking me as the enemy and you don't even give me a chance to talk about it, and it's just you versus me, there's a couple of basic reactions that happen to that conflict. And it's not kumbaya, right?
Yeah.
That's not the nice reaction. So the argument.
Yeah, you're not sitting by a lake singing kumbaya like the one behind me.
No. Not if you're sitting. Now, opportunity, and kind of back to the World War II analogy, was what I was getting at was you mentioned it, Troy, the opportunity for changing the perspective, and you said it too, Skips. Who was once our enemy is now our friend. Japan and Germany, I mean, they were. When you talk about, you go look at the Pacific Theater at the end of World War II in terms of the atrocities and stuff that was happening, and what people were doing, and everywhere else. But now today, the idea of going in the United States having a war with Japan is just
absurd.
Or even in Europe, France and England. I mean, go check the history books. They were fighting for centuries. That doesn't make any sense at all right now. Nobody would ever expect France to invade Germany or England to go invade whatever. So I say that to just say there's a hope, and there's real examples of that heart and mind change. Exactly. Your perspective on it, right?
And I mean, wasn't a lot of that rooted too because of World War I, because of how poorly Germany was treated? It was just kind of, that's what manifested World War II as well. So it was, like you said, it was that change. It's like, hey, this clearly hasn't worked.
you rub your nose. Treaty of Versailles rubbed the nose economically, and I mean, every other lead that you want to in terms of honor, pride, and shoved what was left of Germany, shoved their nose in it. And we're for lack of a better word, we're cruel. In terms of their reparations and stuff like that, right? It's how you treat like bring it full circle to today. The way that you react as if you're on the winning side of the election, or the way you act if you're on the winning side of a deal, right? That situation, how you conduct yourself relative to this, and it goes back to the logic and the emotional side. What happens when you logically finally get that person to, oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, you dummy, you should have. Right? What's that going to do to them? They're going to retreat even further.
Yeah.
Versus,
those walls go up, and then all of a sudden, whatever you say is just going to bounce right off. It could be 100% correct, but just because, like you said, that emotional side gets into it, right? And then there's no more room for conversation, and there's no more room for ideas to flow back and forth.
That's right. So I want to end the conception part of the show with just one more thing from here, as this is getting to something that I think is of real value, and it's the fact that it's us individually. It's the fact that me and you are on this phone call, and I believe we just have a good time drinking whiskey at the fireplace. Just had a baby boy on Monday.
Congratulations.
Go. Boy, hey.
And I have a daughter. My daughter's 2 years old. My daughter discovers bubbles for the first time about 6 months ago. I can't speak to my daughter, right? I can hold her hand and say, don't touch that. I'm teaching her what's going on in the physical world. But when I put bubbles out and she was watching the bubbles, she was reading the physics. She was understanding a language and watching something that was speaking to her that was not me. That is where we all have to get back to. We have to defend our innocence to death. And it's right now, the fact that I don't know what's going on. I don't know the solutions. I am innocent in this. And I am putting forward effort and passion to make the right decision and to combine the right people to make a win. And so when we talk about this drill down segment, we need to talk about it in context of governance. So regulations, social, the people that are getting paid for the mineral rights as we drill, and do the environmental. The operators are in the environmental group, the environmental people. That's what we do. We make environmental distinctions and expectations, the social responsibility of we're paying you because we think this is of value. We're going to make money. You're going to make money as a person. The government and the governance is going to say you can't do it that way anymore. But if it's because we're fighting and we're arguing about something because we're not defending our innocence, I don't know. I'm trying to make the best decision. What do you think about this? I want to know what you think and your perspective to make the best decision as we're talking about ESG in the drill down section. That's all I'm going to say.
So Troy, I think this is the opportunity. If we look at this as a chance to step into this versus as this thing oh my gosh, we have to deal with it. The quicker we bring it into the fold, the quicker we embrace this idea that it's here and it's here to stay, and it's not going to go anywhere. It's been here. It's actually been here for a long time. This isn't a new concept. It's not a new thing. Like I said, it's just taken on this new role in terms of it's now showing up in contracts. It's showing up in actual agreements. It's becoming some of the first questions people ask, not just from a B2B standpoint, but where the first step in this whole equation, what's really gotten people's attention, is the investment financial capital world is actually putting this as part of their requirements relative to their ability to even invest. BlackRock and people like that have this massive capital that they influence. They're the ones that are giving startups and new innovations or existing companies that little extra room capital-wise and financial-wise. And they're willing to do that. But instead of it just being a profitable model, they're throwing in this other aspect to it and saying, here is this. The catch is, what do those three sentiments mean? And this is a question that's way bigger than the podcast. This is a question that's actually bigger than the subject itself, because we're trying to do this quickly. It's the only part of this whole thing that worries me. I love the fact on a personal level that we're bringing this into the equation. I think it's way overdue, but it is extremely complicated.
Yep.
The standards of it, just governance. One of the big elements around governance that always comes up, and it's at the end, but there was a guy, Ray Cameron from BlackRock, was on a webinar I was listening to, and he said it should be at the first, because that's kind of what dictates the whole thing. How do you enforce it? Where do those standards come from? What in the world, how do you do executive compensation? What's fair? And the problem with some of these standards you're now starting to qualify, there's not a definitive science-based answer. What is compensation? Let's just look at not just from a C-level, because we like to pick on the C-level guys and gals all the time. They make too much money, blah, blah, blah. And And yet you go down the road from the CEO down to the first person that's hired, or the latest person that's hired, at the bottom, if you will. What is fair? What is fair compensation? The problem is something like that simple metric is that the beauty of business is that we're allowed to decide for ourselves. That's part of it too. The creative process, right?
Yeah.
That you can do whatever you want. You can have, like, there's some of these companies where they have mandates that the CEO will never, the highest level, highest paid person will never make 15 times more than the lowest. You can do that, or you don't have to care about that at all, and you can own McDonald's and pay some guy or gal $2 an hour for nothing while you're making millions at the top. You don't have to do that. And the problem with that is so where do you draw that line? How do you decide what's fair? Well, now Skips, what do you think? And then Troy, what do you think?
Right.
We're gonna have 3 different answers.
Right.
My answer may change based on the day of the week. And what documentary I just watched, right? So it's
go ahead.
And so what they're trying to do, and we're trying to do it quickly. It's only that concerns me, is we've come up with these standards. Everybody's got, well, this group over here has a standard. There's ASBEs and all the GRI. There's these different groups and they're just organizations. They're just people like you and me at the end of the day.
That's right.
To the people that get around and go, okay, well, what's the standard? And they come up with it. And just like your quality metrics, just like anything else out there, ISO, pick your favorite, standard out there in any kind of context. A group of people got around and just decided, what's the pass rate? What's the acceptable rate? What's the acceptable level? What's the minimum, maximum for this, that, and the other thing? When it's all said and done, it's a group of people that make this decision. And this is where we need to embrace the emotional side and realize and be okay with the fact that we may have to give a little to get a little. It may have, and it may be uncomfortable. It may not be something that we like. And it may be something that's not so definitive that we can put our finger on it and call it good.
Right.
That's all you have to worry about. And then we're just done. Hey, here's the standard and off we go. Because it's going to evolve as well. The energy, we call it energy evolution as part of our podcast as well. Just this sentiment of, like, as you're talking about, Troy, where are we going? What in the world is happening? This isn't the oil and gas industry that I started out in. Who gives, yeah, man, let's not pollute the earth. But other than that, I mean, I can save the whales on the weekend or whatever. Well, why am I caring about this stuff now? And I'm just trying to get this thing done. I got this project, I got this issue, and this is my livelihood. And now you're wanting to throw in this whole other metric around, I don't know, gender inequality or sexuality or something like that. And you're like, whoa, this is the workspace. Like, I don't even know how to handle that. I can't even say the word baby or sweetheart anymore because I'm going to get in trouble. Right.
Sure.
So then it becomes, so I've had friends of mine that, that in the higher levels of their companies asking the same question because they don't know. Like, they're in boardroom meetings going, what in the world do we do? So what I would encourage people to do, first of all, is start with, like I said, this introspection around how these issues play out for them. Do a little research, understand that it's a broad spectrum out there. Everybody has an opinion now. There's all these ESG experts out there. There's all this stuff that's, this is the talking point. This is what this is, and this is what this is. And here it is. It's not going to be definitive, and you're going to have to figure out on a personal level where you fall into that and why. I think it's really, really important to understand your perspective, right? If you're okay with, I don't care what people make and how they make it, really understand where that comes from. Really understand that when somebody says, well, what if I want a little bit more equitability, a little bit more, universal income for all people, even outside of a business from a governance standpoint. What about a culture that you're in, or a state or a city or a country, right? These issues come up with what I think is fair and where you come down on it and why. And I would encourage people first, before looking over at somebody else and going, that is the dumbest thing ever. That's going to cost the company too much money. We're going to go under, because not everybody needs a fitness, rebate for joining a gym. They're just going to sit there and put it in their pocket anyway and not go to the gym. Blah blah blah. Right. So right. So it's this internal argument that we then take externally to the company or the people we work with. Try to understand why you even think the way you do.
Yep.
Take this journey inside. Why, when somebody comes up and says, Black Lives Matter or defund the police, and I'm using these charged words because these, even in a professional environment, we don't like to talk about these things as well. Mm-hmm. But now we just had the first openly transgender member of Senate, member of Congress elected this last cycle. So as a man as a woman used to be a man. Mm-hmm. And now, so let's talk about that. How do you deal with that in the work?
Avoid that one. Yeah. If we transition from conception, what are your thoughts going into ESG? How are you kind of thinking about this right now and it's going to help you make better decisions on what you got coming up?
First and foremost, what I'm trying to do is stay steady. That's the first thing. Don't get so wrapped up in the fervor, right? The hope and change. And look, and I'm a unicorns and rainbow guy as well as a science and logic kind of guy, right?
Oh, you need a little bit of both in your life, right?
Yeah, and I love them both because you start looking at quantum mechanics and you start to realize that
your mind gets blown, and then you
have no idea what's going on. so all that to be said, I really think it's a matter of focusing on, as we go forward in this realm of how do we tackle these issues specifically? What, if I have an issue with it, if I have a pushback around it, if there's something other that's bothering me, I really would start with, why do I have this issue? Why do I have this pushback? Why can I not, why when somebody brings up something like that, do I just want to like push it to the side and it's not there? And so, and having the faith that staying steadfast, that you're not going to have all the answers today, and that's okay.
Yeah.
In this podcast, if you expect this podcast to give you every answer there is about ESG, I'm going to disappoint you.
But here's the thing, you're opening up the dialogue, right? You're getting people to think about these things. Like you said, it is uncomfortable to think about a lot of these ideas, especially in that corporate environment. So opening the dialogue and getting people thinking about it, opposed to just, I'm just going to put my head down at work today, do my, blah, 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 and then get out, right? Just do my task, leave, come back the next day. But these things do need to get brought to light, and as uncomfortable as it might be. And like, maybe there is a solution that's, right in front of us, or maybe that solution is 5, 10, 15 years down the road. Whatever it is, people are thinking about it.
Yeah. And stay steadfast and stay the course. I think that's where the opportunity is, and realize that we don't know right now what to do. And I mean, not to disappoint you, Troy, in that way, but we have some indications. Don't make a quick decision. We give publicly traded companies a hard time all the time. And I'm even on a personal level critical, because they seem to be so reactionary. I mean, just like, you're talking about a long-term investment that you're trying to go by the week, by the day, by the minute.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Right? It's kind of counterintuitive in a way, because it's our tendency to like, oh my gosh, right? Oh, I got to get off the ship if it's sinking at all. Right? Versus staying the course and realizing that the intentions of the people they're asking, or they're pushing these narratives, if you will. And I don't mean narratives as far as like a story, like something they made up, but just pushing this. We need to make sure the environment's taken care of. We need to talk about these social issues. What are the parameters in the sustainable aspects of governance?
Yeah.
Who's making those decisions and why? And just don't let it become something where, because I don't have an answer right now, or because I don't like the answer right now, or because Skips isn't agreeing with me on this one subject, that I have to call it.
Every single one.
Man,
let's say you did. Can you? Because back to the friend side, when you need to use the word that's overused, that is when you love somebody, when you're in a relationship with somebody or something, even our industry, you love it for all the good and you love it for all the bad.
That's right.
And and so that's when you start talking to people. Like, I've talked to a lot of people on the quote unquote renewable side in the last couple of months, especially. And if you give them enough time to start talking, and you really go through and break down those initial layers, they know they have the same problems we all do. They know it's not 100% the answer. They all know that the main core issue here is how do we provide energy for us to live, to improve the lives that we have in terms of quality of life to whatever degree. And that no one answer of all of them, from coal to wind, is the only answer.
No.
Right?
Yeah, no, this is illogical thinking. If that is the choice of which one is it, that's not the question.
Yeah.
This was fascinating to me, the conception part of this. I feel like I am ready for the drill down section. Are you ready, Sean?
Yeah.
Skippo?
Let's do this.
All right, man. We are now officially in the drill down segment of the PBE podcast with Sean McCoy and Matt the Skip Scipione. Before we get started, after just learning and hearing more from Sean and listening to you speak, man, I am absolutely honored to share this time with you, because you are enlightening me And I think that's what we're in search of. And I think that's what we're really talking about here. I am not looking to be taught. I have been taught by the school system my whole life, and that didn't really work out for me at this point. And I'm losing trust in things. So I'm not looking to be taught. I am looking to be enlightened. And I look forward to what you're going to drill down to right now, which is ESG. Very, very important on how we can actually move forward in our industry, make it sustainable. Everyone wins. We're talking about an unwritten joint venture here. The joint venture is between the people, the operators, the environmental regulatory bodies, the governance. We have an unwritten joint venture and a responsibility to get through this. And I think this show is going to be absolutely fantastic. Sir, what do you have for us on ESG today?
Well, to start with, thank you for, again, it's just, I love being with you guys. I love listening to the podcast, but I'd love to start with the first letter E. We hear the word environmentalist in the oil and gas industry. That's like kryptonite to Superman, right? Our initial reaction is what? This is the person that's not only going to tell me,
take my job.
It's not only take my job, they're going to make it difficult. They're going to create all this stupid stuff. They're going to get in the way. There's some bird that may or may not be, at risk for being extinct that I have no idea what wasn't my intention. I'm not trying to hurt anything. But you're going to label me as this evil person who's trying to commit all these issues, and you're going to do nothing but be against me. Mm-hmm. It's like somebody doing an audit, like you're as a safety person's here to just make my life difficult. There are environmentalists. We actually have one coming on our show. Not all environmentalists are the same. And it seems like a basic premise to drill down and say, well, no, of course not, because not everybody in the oil and gas industry is the same. But if I would ask you, I'd challenge the listener, challenge y'all, do you approach environmentalists in that way? Is this a rhetorical question? I don't know about either one of you two gentlemen personally. But if you're human, we have a tendency to group and stereotype and just kind of, it's confirmation bias. You're confirming there's yet another environmental wacko who doesn't understand.
Not environmentalists, but flat earthers, definitely.
So that's a great, I know for you guys, especially, it's like you probably sit awake at night like I do going, where did that come from?
Well, here's a quick perspective on me, a little insight. I have the opportunity of working on a real project. We're talking about a copper molybdenum play in central Arizona. We're trying to get it to the next level and really provide an operator and a mining company the opportunity to get a lot of copper and molybdenum out of the ground as we're preparing for growth, and we need that resource. So talking about the environmental stuff, I am learning a ton about the certain cactuses and plants, and I am not having a knee-jerk reaction to this, and here's why. I have taken the responsibility, knowing how joint ventures actually work, as being the guy who better understand all the economic risks of this potential opportunity. If I don't do my job and find out that there's an environmental group that knows exactly what I have to avoid getting fucking smashed with economic problems and all these fines we have to deal with, what am I doing? No, I need to know exactly what that looks like, and I better know it better than them as quickly as possible. When we got drilling rigs going out there and we're building new roads, that is what my reaction is to environmentalists.
And that's exactly what it should be. That finding, and then also I think, and I'd be curious if did you find yourself at all going deeper and more and understanding more of what they thought or what they would come from? Because sometimes we run into these issues and they may not be about economics for them. It may not be about, expansion and progress. There's an element that's a Western mindset as well, that's just kind of how we're wired. There's a lot of people that are wired. There's cultures, entire groups and civilizations that are not interested in that. As much as that seems odd. And so I'd be curious to know, did you find yourself at all challenged in what you thought? And then how did you process that? Because again, we talked about this, but that need to go internal, like, well, okay, well, what do I got to do? And not just do it just to get it done, but can I really understand? Can I really relate and start to see what they're asking and why is this cactus so dang important?
I wasn't worried about why. I'm not a botanist. I like the cactus. I like looking at them. They're beautiful. I don't mind it. I'm trying to start a business that's going to be successful. So what I did, machine learning, spreadsheet, all plants, animals that if we F up on this program, we are going to get fined this much per animal based on this decision that's been made long before I knew this opportunity even exists. I'm not challenging it. I'm putting it in a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet is linked to a schedule that says, hey, Troy, remember 2 months ago you talked about these details? here's a reminder, and here's that list. And I got to put that in front of every meeting that we have with everybody involved. I have reminders that are like, hey, everybody, this is actually a real thing, because I can't remember yesterday. So I trust that this system and this documented problem that we have, and the ability to use computers and the ability to use, something that can schedule and get ahead of schedules. That's what I did, and that's what we're doing. I can't rely on just myself. It's too big of a problem.
And look, you have to be pragmatic about it. That's a big part of it too. There's a measure. So I mean, I don't want to contradict what I'm saying before about not being able to measure things or whatnot, but there are certain elements that you can. And so I think you measure and you evaluate and you create a value around the things that you can, especially relative to the operation. So that's the discipline part, right? We need to make sure that we're studious in terms of how we're doing these things and look at it beforehand. I think there's so much around the environmental side. If you're just proactive, it's we've said it. This is not a new concept, but looking at going forward, and even to your sense about expanding what even it could be, and understanding that the physical layout of the place that we're going to go. And when we need to extract something from the ground, we need to extract a mineral, a resource of any kind. That's a process, and there's going to be change, and there's going to be, and you can look at it like, I remember the old movie Pale Rider with Clint Eastwood. I may be dating myself a little bit, but in it they show the guy. He's a miner, and they use this water. They use this kind of like this trickle down aspect. They didn't have really a lot of super. The machinery wasn't as advanced as we have now, so they added some to it, and they would actually blast almost with water instead of like panning it out. And he goes and does this business meeting, and they tell him that he's raping the land. And if is this a subtle part of the movie? Those who have seen it, but the people, and this is in the 1800s kind of stuff, and this is back then. There was people that are looking at it going, oh my gosh, you're like water jetting the side of a mountain just to get minerals out. Oh my, look, you're destroying the natural aspect of what's going on here. So the conflict and the emotional side of why that cactus is important, or the transfer of resources out of the ground and the integration we have to get into that formation or that earth to change it, and the impact that we have on it. Yes, sorry. Yes, it may have a business element. Yes, it may put dollars in the bank, and yes, it may put dollars in our pockets, but there's a cost besides that. And that's the real part of the ESG that I don't think has been accounted for a long time. There's a social cost for operating that way. If you want a governance this way, it's not just money. It's making that cost. It's part of that aspect that's making that possible. There's other elements. And if you don't have to measure them, you can ignore them, like you just said. But if I'm not taking into account the social impact of what I'm doing by having a massive layoff, and I mean, maybe you're like, oh, it sucks, I'm upset about it, but the residual impact that has right now, one of the reasons we're starting this podcast is the 25 to 35, especially even the late teens, people coming up into the professional world forever, right? You guys tell me, oil and gas, great way to go, lots of money. You can take your talents, like to South Beach, you can take them to the oil and gas industry and make a lot of money. We're not seeing that like we were before.
That's right.
And promising money. I have a good friend of mine who's way senior at Schlumberger. I mean, he reported to Gould when he was there. Tells a story about his daughter graduating college, and he has this conversation with her where he literally says, so where are you off to next? Because you're getting a job, and she's like, well, I'm going to stay here in Houston. He's like, well, what if they don't send you to Houston? And she literally looks at him and says, no, Dad, that's your choice. I don't care what job I have to get me to stay here. I'm not going to take the best job that's going to send me to Angola, because I don't want to do that to my family. She said that to him. So there's a generational impact of what we've been doing and how we've been running things in terms of what we expect. And so there is a group, and it's led by the quote unquote millennials, even the millennials are in their early 40s. That's a favorite buzzword. It's not the 19-year-olds on the cell phone. These are people in their late, 81. Right. That's
my brother's at the top end of that, and he said it perfectly. He goes, we're in between the boomers and the zoomers, man. We got to make sense of this shit.
I was going to say, I think I'm the last year of the millennials prior to Gen Z. I think it's, 1 year. I think it's 95 is the cutoff. Yeah. So
whoever gets to decide, whoever that person is that decides what that is, right?
Yeah.
But the perspective of living with the history of, okay, let's go get a job where we just make money. Let's go have a career where it takes us wherever we're going to go just to make the most money. There's a cost to it. I think there's a lot of people, especially the senior guys, senior men and women, would tell you there's a cost of being away from home. I remember reading Andrew Gould's profile years ago at Schlumberger, because everybody in the company had you get to write like a bio and like a personal statement. So he wrote it because he literally says, they told me that everybody comes and looks at mine, so I'm going to write it. And he's basically says, if you think being CEO of Schlumberger is glamorous and amazing, and it seems like it to us, oh, they're always speaking and pictures everywhere, and everybody wants to hear, they're like E.F. Hutton or whatever. Every time they start talking, you're like, oh, gotta listen. The wise man on the hill. He's like, I'm away from everybody for like 11 months out of the year. I'm never home, and I haven't been forever, because this is not this one fun, amazing job. It is, it's reporting and the rest of these things, but there's a price. And so all that kind of go back to what you're talking about, Troy.
It's like you have this financial security, right? But at what cost, right? You're now, like you said, I'm not spending time at my family. And it's like, how does that affect your quality of life, right? Like, you don't need to worry about, the electric bill or the rent this month, but at the same time, it's like, oh man, I wish I could spend time with, my son or daughter has a football game this weekend. Like, I'd like to go watch, but I can't.
So it's a paradox. And there's a cost, I think, qualifying what you can, measure what you can that makes a direct impact. But it is imagining, and you talked about this before, Troy, it's expanding your thought process to go, what else is being sacrificed? What else is being asked of those that are involved in this? It's going to make this thing happen. And am I good with that?
That's right. And this kind of transitions into the social, the S of the environmental, social, and governance subject we're talking about today with Mr. Sean McCoy. I'm going to grab a water bottle real quick, so I'm going to edit this out, and then we'll get right back into it.
So Skips, where are you physically?
California.
Oh, nice. What part?
At the moment, yeah. So Ventura County, do you know Camarillo by chance?
I'm trying to, because I've been all up and down California. I was in San Diego in the Navy, been to Northern California a bunch. I've been Paso Robles. I used to go through that area. And where are you? It's southern, right? It's near LA.
Yeah, so it's where I'm at right now is in between LA and Santa Barbara, just kind of like smack dab in the middle between there. So when you're going down the 101, you drive through. Gotcha. But so were you in the
Navy?
You're in the Navy?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I was gonna say, you know where Point Magoo is?
Huh?
Yeah, right here. That's where I am.
Yeah. That makes sense. Yeah, you just got to find the language.
Yeah. I'm like landmarks. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yep.
Well,
so you're in Houston right now.
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Ooh, how's everything there as far as things opening up again and all that? Or closing again. Yeah.
Yeah. Texas as a state just hit 1 million COVID cases. And, but people it's such I don't know how to explain it other than, you just don't go out as much, but we're not quarantined all the time.
Yeah.
And everybody's taking precautions. But what's that?
It's against our nature as Americans and just normal
human beings.
I mean, we're social creatures.
Yeah. Zoom is great, but I'd rather be sitting in a conference room with you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
100%.
That's where social comes in, I think. That's a great transition to this, because you're talking about, do I respect you enough, or do I respect myself enough to know that we can sit down in the same room and we can actually have a cocktail together, eat a meal together, and we're not going to get COVID-19, right? That's what we're talking about now with social impact of all that we do in this journey as environmental, social, and governance through oil and gas industry. What's the social aspect of actually companies getting back together, getting people back together, and moving this thing forward?
So I think responsibility is a really big part of what you just talked about. And so where the issue there isn't even whether or not you're kind of in the same room together, but are you being responsible relative to the opportunity to influence others? And so if I expose you to a virus, if I expose you to something, even an idea, it's on me to regulate that. And it's on me to make sure that if I bring something to you and some sort of social interaction, even if you will, the context by which I bring that to you and how I interact with you in that world, and it brings in a little bit of the political element. We're always politicking, whether we like it or not. And that's not just limited to what we consider, bureaucratic type government politics. I just mean you're with your kids, you start to how do you negotiate with people that you know? How do you negotiate with your friends? How do you negotiate with your loved ones, your wife, your spouse, your husband? There's this, how do you interact with people? It's why there was this love affair with President Trump that he just told it like it was. And, there's a lot of people that like that because they get past all the, well, I can't really tell them what I think. There's this filter, there's this issue. I can't think what I want or say what I want. There's a little bit of a reservation there. And then when somebody does it, you almost feel like a liberation side of it. And so it's kind of like back to COVID. I want to get out of the house. I'm not going to spread it. I'm not the one that's going to do it. And so you're willing to take a little bit of a different perspective on it in terms of how you interact with people, and understanding that we are different in the United States, especially Western culture especially the U.S. We're rooted with a bunch of guys that just didn't like to be taxed, and we didn't want to put up with somebody else's, being in charge of us. Like, we've been rebels since the beginning. That's what we think about it. I mean,
created a similar system.
Right. I mean, it's just like, and if I don't like it, I'm gonna go somewhere else, and you can all go pound sand. And look at. I mean, that's what Texas did against Mexico. We just decided we didn't like the way the rules were anymore, so we changed them. And so anyway, all that to say, it's kind of in our blood to kind of push back against. And there's a healthy aspect to that, of just not adhering to whatever authority tells you. Right. There's an element of that saying, well, is this the right thing? I don't think so. And if you whereas other more kind of societies and cultures that say, we're just going to kind of do, I love the British, that there's a British sense of, fair play and loyalty and duty and honor and stuff like that they have relative to themselves. It's kind of this inherent thing. So all that to say, there's an individual responsibility that starts out that becomes very difficult, again, to understand where my role is and what I'm responsible for. And you take that to your business. What role does your business have? Yours, Troy, and yours, Skips. What role, besides servicing your customers, providing the best products, hiring the best talent you can, and making sure that the numbers are black and not red, what else are you required to do? And the real problem there is there's an opportunity to do all kinds of things, but there's also not a requirement to do something. So you get to decide on that. And it really becomes a difficult issue because, again, now the barometer, the bar is moving. These people over here decide this is what they want. And what do you do when you have investment groups and you have finance people and you have corporate, or you have public perception that says, we want this type of company. And you're like, well, I don't want to be that kind of company. I mean, I'm willing to kind of do these things, but I'm not going to go all like this, and because the problem there too is you start to see, we've seen it. If you mandate diversity based on certain numbers, percentages, right? The big pushback on that is, is that being equitable, or is that truly using equity as an opportunity? Is it giving everybody the same opportunities? I mean, we have to have a certain number of people, a certain type of person for every type of job and for every type of person. And how do we define people now? And it gets complicated. Where does gender come into it? Where does race come into it? What defines those kinds of things? And can I claim, if my great grandmother was a Native American and I'm Sean McCoy, I've never even been to an Indian reservation, but can I claim that I'm a minority kind of thing? So right, it becomes difficult in terms of that aspect because now the companies are all sitting around going, well, what the heck do I do? Because they don't want to not adhere to it.
So that's the social part of ESG. It's the idea that you got to be equal rights to women, men, color, gender. Is that what the social is?
In a sense, yeah. So how a company embraces those issues. What are you doing as a company to be diverse?
What's the suggestion?
Well, so a good example right now, if kind of a barometer, publicly traded companies, and you also have to remember publicly and privately traded companies are going to be looked at a little bit different, because privately traded companies can kind of tell people, that's a nice suggestion, but go away. And then public traded companies do have a public obligation to their, not only the public per se, but definitely shareholders and stakeholders, if you will. So that element around socialism it's what a good example recently is that looking at publicly traded companies at the board makeup, and literally break it down, age, race, gender, things like that, and look at it and say, is there anybody that's not a white guy or a white woman on that board? Start with that. Just one. Is there at least one on a board?
And so the problem, or the ideas that I have with this whole subject is, when did it stop becoming about skill? This job requires a certain set of skills, a certain function of your brain and hands to operate a computer, most likely, or some other physical thing that you have to do. That's black and white. This guy was able to answer all the questions. This guy was able to answer all the questions except for one. Is the problem that you're not being fair because you're implying that everyone that is applying for this job didn't have the same opportunities to learn the skills at the same level? What's the problem here?
So part of the problem is the typical scenario, if you will. And look, and there's a really good chance I could butcher this altogether. This is extremely difficult subject, but I'm going to give it my best. So if I fail miserably, I throw myself at the altar of forgiveness and ask that I'm going to do it my best, because this is why this subject, this is why I get all, I don't want to say defensive, but concerned when people are like, oh, we got the standard, we know what we're doing, here's the line, everybody's happy, trillions of dollars go in, and we just save the world. It's too complicated. So the context of what you just talked about is inferring, and don't take this the wrong way, it's inferring inequity around ability, inequity around experience, as well as that there's the system is kind of bringing somebody up that shouldn't, right? And that gets our hairs to stand up when I've put in the work, I have the experience, I'm the best person for the job. And if you're going to give it to anybody, I mean, this has happened to us. I'm sure you guys can tell stories. When somebody's given something or recognized for something or given a position or something else above you, and they didn't earn it. And I know that's some perspective there, but if there's an argument to be made, that is a feeling that goes back to emotions. Yep. How does that feel?
Well, you just got to be happy with what you got, and it is what it is.
On some level, with the average person, I would argue there's a sentiment that comes with that, and it's not positive to see somebody get something that they didn't deserve. And so part of it too is back to, and you kind of alluded to it, was systemically and historically, the opportunity for just basic education or for just connections in the world or just network, just who's deciding to help bring you along hasn't been equitable from a socioeconomic standpoint. And and the real problem there is it's almost, I do think it's impossible to have this like blanket system.
Right.
Every kid coming out of the high school in the United States has had the exact same type of education, the exact same. It's just no. So this is, again, it's a complex problem.
Well, yeah. Okay. So the social part of ESG is interesting.
Right. Because then you're looking at, so when I hire, because like you just said, you're the business side, and and it's not a blind spot, but you're like, I want to hire the best person. That's your right. Intention. Right. And so the expectation is you look and, here's this, well, if historically, part of the problem is if historically the people that have gotten there by this time, especially as they become senior, if they've had 20, 25 years in, that's a 35, 40 year representation of life. Even before that, got that person in that place. So 40 years ago, certain systems and certain things were in place that didn't allow for lack of a better word, an equitable opportunity for somebody else to experience that, or they've come along and they're not quite as experienced. To your point, is you just give it to that person because, well, they didn't have it fair. So the way to make it fair now is to make it unfair, right? That's the real. So we're going to offset discrimination by being discriminatory. That's the real problem I think a lot of people have around the social side, is that doesn't make any sense. If I force something on some level to happen, but what we've seen, and I think and this is where you want to be, because you have to be nuanced. So around board makeup, I think if you start to dictate a certain percentage of anything, white, black, I don't care what, you are going to limit yourself around that, I think. But I do think that we do have to take a step back and ask ourselves, is if it's nothing but white guys, you're telling me there's not one person that's not like that could have filled that board spot? And I had to take a long, hard look at that. And it was a recent article through some digging around this subject that I was looking at. Yeah, my first reaction is kind of like, oh man, if it's unfair, it's unfair for everybody. It doesn't help anybody. And so did we just lose Skips?
His video will come in and out. But okay. Yeah, we lost him completely for a second.
So how do we address this this inequality if we at least don't take a start with it? And can we say at least is there one? I think that's a good place to start. And there's also an opportunity, back to the steadfastness and around the evolution side, is starting in an area and trying to see what works. And how do we help bring about that equitable thing?
Are there rules? Are there rules in the social part of this where they say,
yeah, they're trying. Okay. They're trying. I mean, you get it.
Rules like if you have 5,000 employees, 1/3 needs to be women, or some rule that says that. Wow. And
that's where the hard part is everybody's trying to define those parameters.
Oh man.
Right. So now,
Yeah.
so,
And that's established business. All of a sudden, new rules come in and put this pressure on an established business that had no worries of any of that. Now, all of a sudden, they have to abide by those things, or what? The SEC comes after them or something?
well, so this is also part of the problem as well, is that, what's the governing authority and any of this is going to come in and say, well, PBE, you're not adhering to such and such. So here's the rule you broke, and we're going to enforce it based on some sort of authority.
Wow. Governance.
Right. So there can be, I mean, we can legislate anything. And that's part of the things with President like Biden coming in, is that there's this, fear now that, okay, all of a sudden they're going to literally legislate through Congress and just mow down and like create these standards like you're talking about. Everybody's going to have a job, and everybody's got to have income, and we're going to become China and all this other stuff. Right. And so in that context, it becomes very easy to let that kind of fear slip in and think, okay, we're going to have this sliding scale where I'm going to be forced to. You, again, especially private business, there's going to be state and local and federal laws, but if it's not a law, there are standards you can adhere to, like industry standards that are saying, here's what we think the bar should be. You got to find yours. In a sense, this is where some of the work comes into it. As a company, you're going to have to go find out what are your peers doing. And then if you're going to ask for funding, if you're going to ask a finance side, one of the things I really become real clear to me in the last 6 months to a year is they come up with their own set of rules. Like if somebody goes to borrow, when a bank, you go to borrow money from a bank, this bank is different than this bank.
Oh yeah.
So it could be the same thing. If you want, investor capital from this group, here's what we think you should be. And how they enforce that is just whether or not they do business with you at the end of the day. Yep. So it's not a punishment per se. It just may not be an opportunity because you're not adhering to a certain level of expectation. Now, and I know if I'm just guessing the way your mind works, right away that how that can be manipulated, how that can be misrepresented, and is it really working? Is it, let's say you meet it, does that mean that now all of a sudden there's no more social issues? Sure. It's like if I hire, certain amount of people, now everything's just fine. And that's why this part of the conversation, if you will, is so difficult, because then you walk away going, I don't know what the heck to do now.
Right. So where are the front lines of all of this? If I was just listening to this show, which I am, and I'm learning about ESG, what of the E, S, or G is really the front lines of making the most impact tomorrow? Is it government coming up with new rules tomorrow? Is it operators coming up with new ideas how to deal with the old problems tomorrow?
It's what we're going to do on the podcast specifically, because this conversation is difficult, is we're just going to tell stories. Our main feature, we're going to have 3 segments. The main primary feature is just telling a story, literally a case study of a business that is using a real tangible business-oriented process, technology, operation. They're doing something within the confines of their everyday business that, as a result, has an impact on one of those 3. So why it's called Elevate. We just want to tell that story and bring it out there to people so that you can hear, what are they? What is such and such company doing? And kind of a quick example, Silver Wolf Midstream is one of the companies where we've interviewed. They took an existing petroleum pipeline in Michigan. Michigan as a state is unique. 80% of the energy is generated in the winter when it gets a little cold in Michigan, and they use propane. It's all propane. And if they don't have propane, there's massive parts of the state that only have wood chips as a backup.
Whoa.
So in the US today. I didn't know that. So what they did is they took this existing infrastructure pipeline and they invested in it because it was actually not being used anymore, and they're flipping the direction and they're using it to move propane so that you don't have to worry about cars, you don't have to worry about trucks as much. So you have a massive social impact, because now, just to be frank, less drivers on the road, less big trucks on the road. That means less big accidents, less issues like that. That equates to real life people, their lives being impacted, both from a quality of life and their actual life being alive, as well as you can talk about insurance rates and transportation costs and reinvesting in the infrastructure of roads, because this trucks tear it up every day. So you have that.
The front
Right.
lines of ESG are happening with the companies currently that are certainly making money, but
Yes.
also making an impact on on our society, on our
Yes.
infrastructure, on how this thing actually operates.
Right.
That's who has the most responsibility in this
Yeah.
country right now.
And so the answer, and look, listen, read, go, do as much Googling as you want. You'll find it's an endless source of information. But what are you doing? So this is why we're telling these stories about these companies. This company's doing this. Halliburton just invested into a completely separate company called Halliburton Labs. They're using the infrastructure physically, their supply chain, their actual people, basically embedded in their facility here in Houston, their global headquarters in the north of Houston, and they're bringing companies in and they're letting them utilize their facilities to develop their ideas and products. There's like second level, beyond the napkin. It's proof of concept already. Now we're getting the second level phase, and they're helping amplify the ability of this product to take off. And it has nothing to do with oil and gas.
What?
It's called Halliburton Lab.
Halliburton's done this?
Yeah, it's called. So again, so this is a good example, right? Right.
Awesome.
Yeah, so it's called Halliburton Labs. Scott Gill is the executive director. Probably one of our first.
You know him?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Dude, can we get a phone call going with Scott, me, you, and Skips on here's an idea? We got more ideas than there are rocks, man.
Yeah.
One of these things is gonna make a lot of money.
No, and that's so this is the kind of stuff if it fits within their parameter, that's why they're creating this. So that's what we're doing is we're telling this is what Halliburton's doing, because the typical PR for Halliburton is what between former Vice President Cheney and Macondo, Halliburton's this bad word, right? Everybody thinks it's either KBR and part of Cheney's the Gulf War, the second Gulf War. He's just doing that was that whole thing, all the contracts that KBR got because it was a subset of Halliburton, and it was just Dick Cheney hooking up his Halliburton friends because he was the former CEO.
Oh,
So it's all this. So that's the public has that perception of Halliburton,
yeah.
right? And then the Deepwater, it's just all that stuff, or the Macondo, and then you have, so the public doesn't know any better, so they just think they're this evil company that just.
Wow. What a great story. Okay, you thought that, and a lot of that stuff could be true. A lot of it's conspiracy. What are they doing now? They're providing a lab where people are coming together with new ideas, elevating. I mean, come on. Now, history is what it is. What are they doing today? They're motivating.
Right. So the idea is so instead of trying to move the whole mountain, just do what you can with what's in front of you, and then celebrate and be honest with it about the effort. And then the other hope about our show is that it also has companies ask themselves, well, what are we doing? What else are we doing? And why can't we do this? If they're doing this, why can't we do that? I mean, we have the same resources. Maybe we have better resources. Maybe we even have better people. We can maybe do that idea better. But instead of it being something where it's like this lost cause and it becomes so overwhelming, you don't want to do anything, pick a lane, pick letters if you can, because that project in Michigan also helps the environment. Because so instead of having this, miles and miles of pipeline doing nothing and rotting in the ground, which nobody wants, right? You now environmentally improve the area because now you're utilizing this existing infrastructure. Yeah. So now you're taking care of E, you're taking care of S. And you could argue and throw in G in there as well, because you're going the governance aspect of the company decided to go into this a little bit differently and to use this as part of their decision-making process. So now you can celebrate that. And here's so then I'm a midstream company. What am I doing? This might be something, but about existing infrastructure that's out there. Can I reutilize it in a different way? You get a better payout rate overall from a business standpoint, because you don't think about it. Instead of the cost of rehashing existing infrastructure versus building something from completely new, Keystone XL has been going on for how long? So that's a business sense. So now you get to check those boxes back to what you're talking about, winning, if you will. And that way there's a win, and it doesn't feel hollow when you say that everybody wins. It actually is something where everybody gets a benefit from it.
People are tired of getting bullshitted, so rightfully so. That's interesting, man. That was a great. I didn't realize this until now, but we kind of had the beginning of the completion part of the show just now. We've been now focusing on, well, all right, if ESG is the future of how business that's actually has money and the responsibility to move forward with making the right decisions, if that's ingrained in everything that they do, well, that's where we could focus our time and attention now for the best future.
Yeah. And that's the other thing too. We need to be honest, and we need to be humble about where we've been and where we're going. We have to realize that we're not going to be the sexy, romantic, front of the line, shiny example of business that we've been for a long time. Tech companies and people like that they've taken over, right? Google, regardless of what you think of them, Apple, Microsoft, that's the romance is that way. We need to be okay with that. We need that part of the stage of our life cycle.
We need to be okay with that as long as they're making responsible decisions, right? As long as they're being transparent in the fact that they are being a reflection of what we're looking for as a collective mindset, as a country, as a people, as a governance, as an environmentalist, whatever.
Yeah.
Skips, you got anything as we get into the completion part of this show?
Now, this is where I cut out, but this is where my brain was thinking. So I don't mean to backtrack on you here, but when you're talking about the social aspect, you're not only talking, you're talking about the social aspect as far as like, the outside perspective on this particular corporation, but you're also talking about the implications of the organizational behavior internally. So kind of touching on, and I thought that was really interesting as far as the qualifications that you were talking about, right? Because maybe you're qualified for that position, more so than someone else, but someone else's diverse background might bring in new ideas into that circle. That was kind of where my head was going. I don't know exactly where that conversation led off to.
So that touches into an area. I remember back to Andrew Gould when he was the CEO of somebody. There's a story about him in Saudi Arabia, and he's giving this presentation, and basically the Saudis asked to some degree, what do we need to do to improve our ability to do business, and what's holding us back? Where's our bottleneck? And he literally, the story goes, he points over at one half of the room, which is basically the women being, in their burqas, being ostracized. He said, half your workforce is being held back, and you're not engaging them. He's like, that's your problem. You're engaging half.
Yeah.
So if we look at this less as, and I know sometimes we say it's about the best qualified, it's about whatever else, or the who gets the job. We have to recognize the fact that there's a lot, especially at the higher levels, a lot of it is who you know. A lot of it is networking. A lot of it isn't necessarily the best person. It's the person that and even in the most qualified persons like sports, the most talent may not be the best team. The most talented team may not be the best team, right? And so just being talented at may not be enough. And back to this diversity of opinion, diversity of perspective, and giving weight to that and realizing that maybe it's not meeting all the typical standard check boxes you want for a board member or for a vice president or for somebody in HR, but can they bring in this other viewpoint? And they still have to have basic value from a competency standpoint. You're not just grabbing somebody off the street or in line at the convenience store. There's an elemental aspect of it that says they have to qualify to some degree, right? But giving that open opportunity for a different perspective. And what does that even look like and feel like? And if you've only heard kind of the one narrative, or you've only kind of been around one group of people, back to Schlumberger, because it's always been a great experience of mine. In Sugar Land, at one point, I remember there was a sign up that they told us there was 54 nationalities in that one product center.
Yeah.
One time, 54.
That's
and not like my four generations ago, my great somebody was Irish, and so now I'm Irish because my last name is McCoy, and I spell my name Irish, right? Even though I've been to the UK, but I have not been to Ireland, I've been to the other islands, but so that these are like people that were really from there. So when you worked with them, you worked with somebody from the Congo, you worked with somebody who grew up in France. This person is from Scotland. Incredible. And so it's gonna enrich. It's like gumbo, or it's like chili, or whatever else your favorite soup. It's all these different elements that go into it, right?
Love that.
If we don't allow for that, and we just stay where we've been in our lane.
Right.
I mean, you create like this echo chamber, right? And then that's like the worst case scenario, right? Now we start to go down these rabbit holes, and we have no new perspectives, right? We're unable to take those step backs. So yeah, that's freaking awesome. Okay. Yeah, that was the last thing I had. I know I missed out on a lot of the policy stuff, but
no, coming through. I love that. All right, so we're in the completion part of the show and almost done with the recording of this thing. So I'm gonna make two comments that I think are logical and suggest something that I believe is true value and where we could focus on how we can move ESG forward the most efficient, accurate, safest, best, most successful way possible. So here are my comments, and then I'm going to drop the bomb. You have environmental, social, and governance. Let's look at social. Social is built on the people. The people have an internal thing that is important to them that doesn't make sense to anyone around them. I think that's logical to say that is a very difficult bottom to get to have a consensus of how things are working and how we should move forward. That's a very difficult one, the most difficult one in my opinion. Then you have governance. Governance is making decisions and rules based on the social aspect of this thing. They're taking environmental into consideration. But they're really worried about the people and making sure that the people are protected, and you're governing, and that's the governance part. So that is closely and way too closely tied to the people and how they feel individually in that whole endless bottom of figuring that out. So then we have environmental. Environmental is rooted in science. Environmental is rooted in the physical world. And when you study the physical world, and right now it's a earth science revolution happening in concepts. I'm not talking about a minor tweak. I'm talking about a complete revolution in earth science. Now, environmental to me has the most grounded foundation to start the argument and how we're going to move forward. It's the science. Now, if the people don't believe in science, well, that's probably 1/3 of the people. Let's manage that situation, figure out how they can help. But the reality and the most logical thing, in my opinion, is to focus on environmental, being grounded in what's happening in earth science revolution, specifically in this process called serpentinization. That's completely unfamiliar to all of us, but it's there. The data's...
Yeah. You introduced that phrase to me. Yeah.
That's it. So let's go there. Neil deGrasse Tyson. How do you say his name?
Neil deGrasse Tyson.
Yeah.
Neil deGrasse Tyson is there in the latest episode of The Cosmos. Joe Rogan is there with his people are talking about serpentinization. We have the geologic context of it in the geology world. That's where we live. That's how we think constantly of the physical world. How did we actually get here? Life, the cosmos, the rocks, the processes that make hydrocarbon, and what is the business that they are all in trying to make better money. It comes back to the environment, comes back to the physical world. We can look down at our feet and be grounded in this truth and start figuring it out from there with some governance of logic and how the actual process works. Then we'll come together. Then we'll make an impact on the social. Then we'll make the right governing calls and we'll move this thing forward. That's my argument.
Right. And so it seems to make sense to start with the logic and the science. And so what we'll do is we'll start with that one. And it reminded me of when Vice President-elect Kamala Harris was in the debates with former Vice President Pence. She said, talking about global warming, that we have this number all the time. 97% of scientists agree that we've had an impact on climate change, right? Humans are having an impact on climate change, and we've felt this way for 20 years. And when she said the science is clear, what I thought was really interesting about that statement was I would make the argument with her that the science is not clear, right?
Otherwise, it'd be 100%.
Well, so you tell me what scientists or what people on any level, on any subject agree outside of like maybe basic math and stuff like that you can get 97% of scientists in the same room for 20 years and they've never changed their mind on it. And it's the same thing. And within the science is so clear that it's, and even the context of those questions, it's like that toothbrush thing. 2 out of 3 dentists, recommend this. Well, 2 out of the 3 dentists that you asked. And so it's like, it's not maybe 2 out of every dentist that's in the world. It's, you can manipulate data and make it sound, a certain way. And so I think part of the issue is the science. It's not only not clear, but we also don't agree on it, even though it's illogical. And this goes back to the whole thing again, not to beat it, because it may frustrate people, but I can give you science. I can show you, I just shared something on LinkedIn the other day, that in a period of a year, you're going to get more radiation exposure from potassium-40 and eating a banana than you are standing outside of a nuclear power plant in a year. I can show you that. I can put it on a graph. I can show you the chart. I can get you to understand the LARA. I can get you to understand all these different things. I can educate you to the nth degree, but it doesn't mean that you're going to believe it.
Yeah.
And so then, right. And it doesn't, and that's even what there may be science out there you're not even aware of, right? So there's a data gap in terms of understanding of things of that nature. So in the environmental side, it seems like the easy one is the one everybody's going after because, we can reduce emissions and you can measure that. Right. Well, here's our targets. You don't hear social targets. We're going to have a black president by a certain date. You don't hear stuff like that from a projection standpoint, but, we'll reduce carbon emissions or we'll be net zero because we think we can measure it. And then it gets, there's damn lies and statistics. So we can make data do all kinds of things, right? We can make it work for us or against it. So it's, so
Yep.
and this goes back to what Skip's was talking about. There's a fatigue where people are starting to go, now I don't know what to believe in, because as soon as I put my finger on this one to believe in it, I go do some more research and drill down a little bit more, find out something more.
There
And
you
man,
go.
I'm not being told the truth all the time. Well, it's
Yeah.
not complete. And so then it starts to get you. So then the sign.
Well, at least people are willing to start believing.
Well, so part of the suggestion is to stay, again, back to steadfast, stay the course and go down that road and continue to educate yourself and not and stay steady, because it's important to get it right. Because I don't know, I'm torn on a personal level. I don't want this. I mean, I know we have an impact. You know, it's this argument. If I water a plant that was going to die before, I'm impacting the climate by keeping the plant alive. Or if I dig up a bush in my front yard, I've impacted the climate. I mean, where does that start and stop and end? Not to be like, trite about it, but it's, I mean, to what degree are you talking about here in terms of the impact that we're having?
Oh man, you're okay. So I love the Dirty Heads, man. It's a song called "In My Head." I'm in my head. I'm in my head. That's what he's talking about. I'm in my head, because he's saying, tell me your feelings, because I have those feelings too. You feel torn. I feel the tear. But we're not healing unless we're doing these conversations. We're not healing unless we put something forward, but people can actually grab onto it, and there's some meat, there's some depth. There's no fucking conspiracy, right? There's no document that one person can read and nobody else can read, and we all make assumptions about it. Those days are gone. The system is flipped. We're moving forward. If we're not on the same page in this comment, then this podcast was potentially a waste of time, in my opinion. The standards that have been built, that ESG is standing on, are not the correct standards. The model is broken. The model is wrong. And now we're building the model to build the right standards. This is a reorganization and a new way to move forward.
So maybe to help the perspective and maybe help the narrative in your head, think of it as incomplete versus wrong. Because wrong implies...
No. I object, man. I'm sorry, but I object. The 97% of the scientists who said that the CO2 emissions, and they made that rule, are making it on a model that is completely wrong. It's inaccurate to the nth degree in your terms. It doesn't take in what we know of the planet now and the power of our planet and the star we live on. The reality of the model is completely bad. We have to renegotiate what model we're talking about to make a decision. The 97% is based on people's opinions. That's a group of scientists, of people making a decision on a model that is completely outdated. It is not a tweak, man. This is a complete flip.
Yeah, and there's at some point you have to acquiesce and to say, look, it's an incorrect perspective. True. In terms of this is where the politicking, the social side comes in. Is how do you then, because you have the vice president elect in a debate stating this in front of the world, and there's people that will parrot this. I mean, President Obama did it all the time. He would just write, 97% of scientists agree that the humans impact climate change. And so when the president says that, so they're going to look at me and go, or you, even though I'm from an education standpoint, pretty fair to argue, you know what you're talking about in this world more than I do, or more than President Obama does. And so the hard part is going to be, how do you get that person who sees him as this authority figure inherent because he's a president or a congressman or somebody who's, heck, even football players or people that entertain us, we listen to, right? That's what they tell us, what to buy and where to go and what to do. Yep. And so you come in, so it's a struggle. This is where the real work comes in on the individual. You're going to have to sit there and know all of that. It's the curse of knowledge in a sense from the bias to say, you're going to know this and go, man, it is like talking to a wall. And so there's going to be a struggle. That's part of the struggle. That's part of it. It's there's no magic formula other than
people are ready.
They are ready. They are ready to listen if you create a relationship with them, if you come alongside of them and bring them along and let them know that you care and let them know that you're not interested in destroying the environment. You're not just doing this as some oil company can make a bunch of money. Are those things going to happen? Yes. But if you can show that you care as well, people will respond. And so this is where, so stay true to what you know and understand the frustrations coming, because that stuff is frustrating.
Yeah.
I listen, I know people like yourselves, and you're just sitting there going, man, what do I have to, what do I have to do, to shine this? Like, this is how you think about this one thing over here, you're going to completely change the entire, nature of the planet and how the system works. You're going to have this impact. It's a tall order. So it is difficult in that area. But the problem is there's a wave coming it's this other wave of, and it's a lot of it's based on ignorance, and a lot of it isn't. And so you're going to have to, like rocks against the waves, you're going to have to stay steady and stay true,
Right.
and just kind of work through it. And I don't know a better answer to give people, because it
Yeah.
is frustrating. It is. I mean, I know it's frustrating, because you want it to be definitive. It is definitive in some sort of way, and and that's where I try to politic a little bit. Call it incomplete. Call it kind of a stage in the process of their learning, or whatever you want to call it, like that.
That's where it gets funky, man. We're talking about academia to its core and the understanding of the physical world. It is different. There's so much to learn. There's so much to be grounded in the details. And it's the ability, in my opinion, for us to communicate at a worldwide scale, like Schlumberger has proven to do, a whole new way of thinking about that, grounded by science, grounded by logical, a good model that makes good predictions. That's where we're at, man. So it's not a decisive conversation. It is an opportunity to create something of value today.
And this is where so part of that ability to engage is going to go back to a little bit of the Neil deGrasse Tyson. There's a charisma. There's an engagement on a personal level you're going to have to deal with, and that goes. We keep talking about it, but how do I appeal to you emotionally? How do I let you know that I care? And it's authentic and it's true. That's why I love podcasts. I think you get to hear people. You get to know them. Like I feel like I know you guys before I ever talk to you, because I listen to you.
Yeah.
And that's important, because then if I don't feel that way, you can say whatever you want. I'm not going to hear you.
Yeah.
It's the part of that price. It's difficult. And I get it. And we can't stop and rely just on facts. You have to be friends, and you have to be friendly as well. If you really want that to go over, if you really want that to connect, you're going to have to do that, because businesses do that, there's an image, a brand creates something. And this would go into the social side you were talking about. In terms of what I would argue, where do we go as people? Because we're going to have differences. You two guys, when you work together, you're not just Troy, you're not just Matt. You're this other thing that's made up of both. And if you can get people to see that vision, and this is culture, this is community, this is a group or organization, this is whether it's written or unwritten, right? This is what you're creating. And if you understand that vision first, and it's this collective of it, and then you find what's this thing we can believe in that we can all be a part of and truly be a part of, because this is the other problem around these kinds of things. We've done this for a long time, but if you're not part of it, or you don't feel like you have a chance or a place at the table or a place, in the system, there's not a place for you, you're going to probably reject it, especially if it's counter to what you're doing, and it treats you poorly. So the social side, it's about abandoning everything that you want individually, and recognizing there's a greater. I could not be greater than you and I together. Mathematics, back to logic, the collective me versus you and me. There's no way I could be better than that.
Simple physics, man. Got more mass together.
Right. But then what makes those physics work? What makes it? There has to be, if they don't relate and if they don't get along, right? There's chaos, and there's
more energy.
There's more energy, and it's energy we can't contain. But if you can get it together and balance it, man, it's this system, it's this company, it's this culture, it's this area. And that's the real big thing for companies to try to overcome. And how do you create this corporate culture? And back to COVID a little bit, going forward, it's going to be really interesting, because all this Zooming and remote offices and stuff like that, how are you going to create corporate culture if all we ever do is check each other on a screen?
Yep.
And then once, quote unquote, we go back to the way it was, how are we going to adapt from going from Zoom back into, an office environment and, collaborate effectively there, right?
Wow,
people are so used to just, sitting at home, turning off their screen, picking their nose, and then, logging back in. And all of a sudden now I'm sitting at a desk, and I got 3 people right next to me.
I got to hear him talk, and I got to hear him sneeze and cough. And it's like,
I got to clean my intake real quick. Let me get this camera off.
I got to shower every day, and I got to So that's going to be, these are challenges that are coming. And then, the governance side is really, really going to be the part where it leads it. And it comes down to people that are in leadership, and recognizing that the power is not equitable, realizing that the CEO of BP decides something and I decide something, the result of that are different, and understanding that the governance side has a greater responsibility than most, because they have the ability to dictate where these things go. And
Yeah,
make,
we trust that system, man. Yeah,
right.
that's the
And
system.
what does this new system look like? And how do I make the best decision? And all at the same time, taking all the things we talked about, going, I could get this all wrong. I could fall flat on my face. And this,
Yeah, well, we did, man. We did, in my opinion. We've done that. We've fallen. We're at the bottom. We're building. It's fine. America has never got to its potential, man. We're 200 years old. It was built because King George was taxing us and going out and spending his private jets and stuff. So we wanted to do the same thing. Wait a minute. We make a lot.
Did you just say private jets?
Well, not in King George.
Yeah, I was gonna say
18th century version. I know what he meant.
I tied it. Yeah, we're in the moment, man.
Okay.
Anyway,
just clarifying.
The idea that, hey, America, we have this opportunity to take what this is and build what we want, and we never got there, man. We've never gotten there. We continue to put business out on the front lines as it's making the reality, because that's how people get paid, and that's how we monetize, and that's what makes the world go round. But it's not. It's not. And people are aware of this now. They feel this now. It is not. Serpentinization, the earth makes the world go round, and geologic processes make this world go round, and it allows us to have the stability of air quality until something catastrophic happens, blah, blah, blah. The end of the day, I think what needs to happen is you, sir, Sean McCoy, needs to take a serious effort in getting involved in the politics and getting involved in finding a seat at this table to speak logically at this table and to take in those emotions and to metabolize them and make sense of a good decision. You, sir, have incredible talent, as we just had this incredible show. Do that for us.
I was going to say, you're, I mean, if you get that seat at the table where you're influencing the policy, behind the governance, and because that's what really, at the end of the day, right, controls everything, is that policy that's put in place. And from there, right, then you could evaluate the social, environmental, and, the governance aspects of it. But you need someone who understands the environmental, social, and the governance aspects in order to create that policy.
Yeah. No, and it's because it's a system thing. It's been the biggest, right, the learning point of the last 2-3 years for me was, I'll just use an example. When you see law enforcement have an issue with, whether it's based on race or socioeconomics or something like that, there's always the system is what's broken, or the system is what needs to be improved, I should say, because it doesn't matter who the cop is. The system, it could be an African-American cop, it could be a white cop, it could be a Vietnamese cop, it could be a woman, it could be a man. But if the system is not set up properly, the result will become what the system sets forth. It's like software. The hardware doesn't care. The software runs it. So if the software is off, you update it. And that's a very simplistic way to look at this.
Yeah.
But if you can pull back a little bit and see that, hey, I need to change the system. And if the system was set a certain way before to only take in a certain kind of person or a certain kind of group of people, then the system needs to be changed. And that change, that's that you talked about, that metabolism, Troy, you're talking about. That is that chrysalis, right? That worm goes, and there's stuff going on in there, right? It's difficult and it's transformational, but on the other side is this butterfly, and that's the part we should be hopeful about. Is I do believe, I just haven't yet. I don't know where the extremists are, and maybe it's just situational with people, but it doesn't matter who I'm talking to on any side of it. If you get them down to the base level, we're all kind of coming at this from the same standpoint.
That's right.
We really, really are. Right. We're plagued by the same things. And so and I do believe that, Troy. I do believe that we can find that. And I appreciate your words of encouragement to go out in there and make a difference. And we want to do that with this. We want to do that with this podcast and other things, because people are worth it. We're worth it. Our country is worth it. The industry is worth it. The oil and gas industry is worth it to do this, to go through this pain with them. It is worth it. And not just because we're going to make a few bucks, but because the part that really, it's saving. We interviewed a guy the other day, 24 years old, born in Nigeria by candlelight, could have died at childbirth because the only thing that they had was a candle in this place where his mother was giving birth to him in 1996. That we need to change that. That's a quality of life improvement.
That's it. Quality of life. And I just had a baby, and that was not the case. And I got chills when you say stuff like that, man. Well, Sean, it has been an absolute honor to share this time with you, man. I've really enjoyed it. I know Skip has enjoyed it. This is the end of the show.